Hello everyone, welcome to the Story Tales, your place for the best horror stories. For the next hour, I want you to put on your earphones, put your phone face down, and close your eyes. Relax, and let this story take you to a world full of chills and mystery. I've been listening to horror stories for years, and now I'm here to share the most amazing ones with you. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The building I live in isn't fancy, but it's home. An old creaky structure on Pine Street with its own kind of charm, if you can call uneven floors and flickering hallway lights charming. For the most part, it's quiet, which is why I decided to rent here in the first place. My name's Sam, by the way. I work at a coffee shop downtown, and my life is as uneventful as it gets. Or at least, it was until I started noticing something strange about the apartment at the end of the hall. It's apartment 6E, just 3 doors down from mine. Unlike the rest of the units, it always seemed different. The air around it felt colder, heavier, and somehow darker, even under the pale glow of the hallway lights. People whispered about it sometimes. Someone rents it, my neighbor Mrs. Cooper told me once, but I've never seen them. They must keep odd hours. Odd hours? That's putting it mildly. For months I never saw anyone enter or leave 6E. No moving trucks, no late-night arrivals with groceries. Nothing. Yet some nights I'd hear noises coming from inside, heavy footsteps pacing back and forth, a dull, rhythmic thumping, like someone was dropping something over and over again. Occasionally I thought I heard scratching sounds. At first I brushed it off. Old buildings make noise. That's just how they are. But after a while, I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was late November when things started to escalate. The first snow of the season had blanketed the streets outside, muffling the usual city noise. I remember coming home that evening around 9:30. My friend Jessica and I had spent the evening catching up over coffee. The warmth of the cafe still lingered in my bones as I stepped out of the elevator onto my floor. That's when I heard it. A scraping sound, long and deliberate, like nails dragging across wood. My skin prickled. I stood still, the grocery bag in my hand crinkling as I tightened my grip. The sound was coming from the direction of 6E. I glanced down the hallway. The light above the door flickered faintly, casting a sickly yellow hue on the worn carpet. Something felt off. The air seemed to hum with tension, the kind you can't quite put into words. My gut told me to keep walking, to go straight to my apartment and lock the door. But something else, a mix of curiosity and stupidity, urged me to take a closer look. I hesitated for a moment before walking toward the end of the hall. My footsteps felt too loud, each one echoing in the silence. The scraping noise stopped abruptly, as if whoever, or whatever, was making it had noticed me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. My breath puffed out in white clouds, and I realized just how cold it was. The hallway shouldn't have been this cold. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be standing behind me, but the hallway was empty. I reached 6E and stood in front of the door. It was an ordinary door, dark wood, brass handle, the number 6E bolted crookedly in the center. But something about it made my stomach churn. The silence on the other side felt heavy, almost alive. I raised my hand to knock, but stopped myself. What was I even going to say? "Hey," I heard a weird noise. "Everything okay in there?" I lowered my hand and leaned closer, pressing my ear to the cold wood. At first I heard nothing, just my own breathing and the faint hum of the building's heating system. Then, faintly, I caught it. A low, guttural moan. It didn't sound human. My chest tightened and I pulled back, heart pounding in my ears. I stepped away from the door, intending to head back to my apartment, when a loud bang rattled the door. I jumped, nearly dropping my keys. The sound was deafening in the stillness, like someone had slammed a fist, or something heavier, against the other side. "Who's there?" I stammered, my voice trembling. No response, just silence. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to move. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. When I reached my apartment, I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly that it took 3 tries to get the door unlocked. Once inside, I locked the door behind me, bolted it for good measure, and slid down to the floor. My heart was still racing, and my palms were damp with sweat. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the door, half expecting to hear footsteps or knocking. But nothing came. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind outside sent my nerves into overdrive. I kept thinking about the moan I'd heard, the loud bang, the way the air around 6E felt so wrong. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe someone had moved in without my noticing. Maybe they dropped something or tripped. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The next morning, I decided to talk to Mrs. Cooper. She was the closest thing I had to a friend in the building, an older woman with a warm smile and a tendency to bake far too many cookies for one person. I found her in the lobby, checking her mail. "Morning, dear," she greeted me. "You look pale. Everything all right?" I hesitated, unsure of how to explain what had happened without sounding like a lunatic. "It's, about 6E," I said finally. Her expression darkened. "What about it? Have you ever heard noises coming from there? At night?" She stared at me for a moment before sighing. "That apartment has always been strange. Tenants come and go, but no one stays for long. Some say it's cursed. Others think it's haunted. I don't know what to believe, but if I were you, I'd steer clear of it." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and unease. At least I wasn't imagining things. But if what Mrs. Cooper said was true, then whatever was going on in 6E was far from normal. That evening, I resolved to ignore the apartment entirely. I put on a movie, made some popcorn, and tried to lose myself in the mindless plot. But as night fell, the familiar noises returned, scraping, thumping, and that low, almost inhuman moan. I turned up the volume on the TV, trying to drown it out, but the sound seemed to grow louder, more insistent. By midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I muted the TV and sat in silence, straining to hear. The noises continued, steady and deliberate, as if someone, or something, was trying to get my attention. I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what on earth was going on in that apartment. Little did I know, that night was only the beginning. The next morning I felt like a shadow of myself, groggy, tense, and plagued by the eerie sounds that had kept me awake all night. I shuffled into the kitchen, brewed a strong pot of coffee, and tried to shake the feeling that someone was watching me. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was something deeper, gnawing at me like a splinter buried under my skin. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around the mug for warmth, replaying the events of the previous night in my head. The scraping, the thumping, the moan. It all felt so vivid, so impossible to dismiss as a figment of my imagination. And then, there was Mrs. Cooper's warning. That apartment has always been strange. Steer clear of it. Her words looped in my mind, anchoring me to the reality that something was definitely wrong with 6E. But what? Was it haunted? Was someone living there trying to scare me? Or was it something else entirely? I didn't have answers, but I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. By noon, I'd convinced myself to do something I hadn't done in months. Call my friend Jessica. "Sam, hey," she said when she picked up, her cheerful voice cutting through my unease. "What's up, you okay?" "Yeah, kind of," I lied. Listen, are you free to hang out later? I need to talk to you about something. Of course. Everything all right? Not really, I admitted. I'll explain when we meet. Can you come over? Sure, be there in an hour. When Jessica arrived, her presence was like a warm blanket on a cold day. She swept into my apartment, a whirlwind of energy with a takeout bag in one hand and a concerned look on her face. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said, setting the bag on the counter. I might have, I muttered. That got her attention. She pulled out 2 containers of noodles and handed me one. Okay, spill. I told her everything. About the noises, the cold air around 6E, the bang on the door, and Mrs. Cooper's cryptic warning. Jessica listened intently, her usual playful demeanor replaced by a seriousness that unsettled me. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, chewing her bottom lip thoughtfully. That's creepy, she said finally. But are you sure it's not just some weird tenant, like a night owl or someone with, I don't know, strange hobbies? I thought about that, I said, but it doesn't explain the sounds. They don't feel normal. It's not just noises, Jess. It's the way the air feels near the door. It's like stepping into a freezer, even though the rest of the hallway is warm. And the moan, it didn't sound human. She shivered. Okay, yeah, that's freaky. So, what do we do? I blinked at her. We? Of course, we. You didn't think I'd let you handle this alone, did you? Relief flooded through me, and I smiled for the first time in what felt like days. Thanks, Jess. Don't thank me yet, she said, grabbing her phone. First, let's do some research. We spent the next few hours scouring the internet for anything we could find about my building, 6E, and the strange occurrences I'd been experiencing. Most of it was a dead end, generic articles about hauntings, urban legends, and creepy apartment stories that didn't feel relevant. But then Jessica stumbled on something. Check this out, she said, turning her laptop toward me. It was an old news article from 1997. The headline read, "Tenant found dead in apparent ritual in Pine Street apartment." My stomach dropped. That's my building, I said, pointing at the grainy photo of the front entrance. Jessica nodded. Yep, and guess which apartment it happened in? I didn't need to guess. According to the article, a man named David Ellis had been found dead in 6E. His body was discovered by the landlord after neighbors reported a foul smell. The scene was described as disturbing, with strange symbols drawn on the walls in what appeared to be blood. Police suspected some kind of ritualistic activity, but never identified a suspect. They never solved it, Jessica said, scrolling through the article. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Could that explain the strange energy in the apartment? The noises? The cold air? This is insane, I muttered. I've been living just a few doors down from this place for months and no one ever mentioned it. Jessica shrugged. People like to forget things like this. It's easier than dealing with the reality of it. Reality, I repeated, shaking my head. This feels like a nightmare. She closed her laptop and gave me a reassuring smile. Hey, we'll figure it out. Maybe we can talk to the landlord or... A loud bang interrupted her, making both of us jump. It was coming from the hallway. Jessica and I exchanged a look. Is that... She started. Yeah, I said, already standing. We moved cautiously to the door, my heart hammering in my chest. I opened it just a crack and peeked out. The hallway was empty, but the sound continued, a rhythmic pounding that echoed off the walls. It's coming from 6E, I whispered. Jessica grabbed my arm. Sam, wait. Are you sure about this? I wasn't sure about anything, but I couldn't ignore it. Not anymore. We stepped into the hallway together, the sound growing louder with each step. The light above 6E flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows on the door. When we reached it, the pounding stopped. I held my breath, half expecting something, or someone, to burst through the door, but the silence was deafening. Jessica nudged me. "Do we knock?" Before I could answer, the door creaked open. We both froze. The door opened just a few inches, revealing nothing but darkness inside. A cold draft spilled out, making my skin crawl. "Hello?" Jessica called out, her voice shaking. No response. I reached out, pushing the door open wider. "Sam, are you sure?" Jessica started, but I didn't let her finish. The apartment was freezing. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like stepping into a cave deep underground. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse. A couch, a table, a single chair. Everything was coated in a thin layer of dust, as if no one had lived there for years. But the strangest thing was the symbols. They were everywhere, on the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. Strange, angular shapes drawn in a dark, rust-colored substance that I didn't want to think about too hard. Jessica clutched my arm. "Sam, I don't like this. We should go." I nodded, my throat dry. "Yeah, let's..." The door slammed shut behind us. We spun around, panic surging through me as I grabbed the handle and yanked. It wouldn't budge. "Open it!" Jessica screamed, her voice rising in terror. "I'm trying!" I shouted, pulling harder. The air around us seemed to vibrate, a low, guttural hum that grew louder with each passing second. And then we heard it. The moan. It came from the shadows in the far corner of the room. Deep, guttural, and unmistakably inhuman. Jessica screamed, and I turned just in time to see a shape. Tall, impossibly thin, and wreathed in darkness, emerging from the corner. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing her hand. But there was nowhere to run. The thing in the corner moved with an unnatural grace, its elongated limbs twisting as it slithered toward us. Its very presence seemed to warp the air around it, and the symbols on the walls began to glow faintly, pulsing with a sinister red light. My breath caught in my throat, every instinct screaming at me to flee. But there was no escape. The door wouldn't budge. The windows were sealed shut, their glass frosted over as if consumed by the same impossible cold that filled the room. Jessica clung to my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the low hum that vibrated through the apartment. "I don't know," I croaked. The figure stepped fully into the dim light, and I felt my knees weaken. It wasn't just tall, it was towering, its skeletal frame wrapped in what looked like tattered, shifting shadows. Its face, or what passed for one, was a hollow void, a swirling mass of darkness where its features should have been. It reached out a long, spindly hand, its fingers ending in sharp, claw-like tips. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracking. To my shock, it paused. The humming in the air intensified, and a deep, echoing voice reverberated through the room, not from the creature, but from everywhere at once. "Why do you disturb this place?" Jessica and I exchanged a terrified glance. The voice was neither male nor female, neither human nor machine. It was a presence, vast and all-encompassing, pressing down on us like the weight of an ocean. "We didn't mean to," I said, my words tumbling out in a panicked rush. There were noises and the door opened and..." "Lies." The voice boomed, and the symbols on the walls flared brighter, their light searing into my eyes. I shielded my face with my arm, but I couldn't look away. It felt like the symbols were burrowing into my mind, unraveling my thoughts. "Please," Jessica cried, tears streaming down her face. "We didn't know. We just wanted to understand what's happening here." The creature tilted its head, as if considering her words. Then it stepped closer, its movements impossibly smooth, like it was gliding rather than walking. "You seek answers. I nodded frantically. Yes, yes, we just want to understand. The room seemed to ripple, the walls bending and warping like a funhouse mirror. The creature extended a hand toward the table in the center of the room, and with a flick of its wrist, a book appeared, ancient and crumbling, its leather cover etched with the same glowing symbols that adorned the walls. The truth is written here, the voice said, but truth has a price. Jessica grabbed my arm. Sam, don't. Whatever it's offering, it's not worth it. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from the book. Something about it called to me, a deep primal urge I couldn't explain. What kind of price? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The creature's void-like face seemed to focus on me, and for a moment, the entire room fell silent. Then the voice spoke again, softer this time, but no less menacing. The price is your freedom. To know the truth is to be bound by it. My stomach churned. Bound? What does that mean? You will become its keeper, its guardian. This place, this truth, will be yours to protect for eternity. Jessica shook her head violently. No, no way. We're not doing this. We're leaving, and you can keep your creepy book and your creepy apartment. She tugged at my arm, but I stood frozen, torn between fear and an inexplicable curiosity. The creature waited, unmoving, its hand still outstretched toward the book. What happens if we don't take it? I asked. The creature didn't answer. Instead, the symbols on the walls began to shift, their glowing lines rearranging themselves into new patterns. Images formed, horrific scenes of chaos and destruction, a fire consuming the building, shadows creeping through the streets, consuming everything in their path. The truth cannot be undone, the voice said. If it is not contained, it will spread. Jessica let out a sob. Sam, please, let's just go. I looked at her, my heart breaking at the fear in her eyes. But then I looked at the book, and something deep inside me stirred. This was bigger than us, bigger than my fear, my doubts, or my longing for a normal life. If what the creature said was true, then leaving this place meant unleashing something terrible on the world. I'm sorry, I said, my voice trembling. Jessica's eyes widened in horror. No, Sam, don't. But it was too late. I stepped forward and reached for the book. The moment my fingers touched its surface, the room erupted in light. The symbols flared so brightly that I had to close my eyes, but even through my eyelids, the glow was blinding. The cold air around me seemed to burn, a sensation both painful and exhilarating. The creature stepped back, its form dissolving into the shadows. It is done, the voice intoned. You are bound to the truth. The light faded, and when I opened my eyes, the apartment was empty. The symbols on the walls were gone, the oppressive cold replaced by a heavy stillness. Jessica stood by the door, staring at me with a mixture of fear and disbelief. What? What just happened? She whispered. I looked down at the book in my hands. Its cover was warm to the touch, and the symbols no longer glowed. But I could feel their presence, etched into my mind like a brand. I don't know, I said, but I think it's over. She shook her head. Over? Sam, you just agreed to what exactly? Be the guardian of some cursed apartment? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the moment I touched the book, something had shifted inside me. A connection had formed, tethering me to this place in a way I couldn't explain. The door creaked open, and the warm light of the hallway spilled in. Jessica took a step back. I can't do this. I'm sorry, Sam, but I can't be a part of this. Jessica, wait. I pleaded. She hesitated, tears glistening in her eyes. "You made your choice, Sam. I just hope it was worth it." And then she was gone. I sat alone in the apartment for hours, the weight of the book heavy in my lap. The symbols on its cover seemed to shift when I wasn't looking, as if alive. The voice echoed in my mind, its final words haunting me. "You are bound to the truth." As the hours turned into days, I began to understand what that meant. The noises in the apartment stopped, but the presence remained. The air around me thrummed with an energy I could feel in my bones. I started seeing things, glimpses of shadows in the corners of my vision, whispers in languages I didn't understand. The book revealed its secrets slowly, each page uncovering a fragment of a truth so vast and incomprehensible that it made my head spin. And yet, I couldn't look away. This was my life now, my purpose. To guard the truth, to keep it contained, to protect the world from what lay within. The night was calm, almost too calm, as if the world was holding its breath. The soft rustle of leaves outside my window had always been a comforting lullaby, a familiar sound that cradled me into sleep. But tonight was different. As I lay in bed, the moon casting pale shadows on the walls, a strange sound drifted into my room, pulling me from the brink of slumber. At first I dismissed it, thinking it was just the wind whispering through the trees. But there was something peculiar about it, something deliberate. The sound wasn't random or fleeting like the wind. It had a rhythm, a slow, uneven tune that seemed to hover in the air. I sat up, my heart starting to beat faster. The melody was faint, but distinct, and it sent a shiver through me. I leaned closer to the window, my breath fogging up the glass as I tried to listen more carefully. The sound was unlike anything I had heard before, soft, haunting, and oddly familiar, like a forgotten lullaby sung out of tune. It filled the air with an unsettling calm, wrapping around me like an invisible mist. For a moment, I considered going back to bed, convincing myself it was nothing, but curiosity gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this melody was meant for me, calling me to follow it. The night outside was serene, the village quiet under the watchful gaze of the full moon. But the sound didn't belong to the night. It was coming from somewhere else, somewhere not too far away. I threw on my jacket, the fabric rough against my skin, and tiptoed across the creaky wooden floor of my room. The house was silent, my parents fast asleep. I slipped out the front door, the cold night air biting at my face. The street was empty, bathed in the soft glow of the moon. Shadows danced across the pavement, and the distant hum of nocturnal insects filled the silence. I followed the sound, my footsteps echoing softly in the quiet night. Each step felt heavier, as if the air around me grew thicker with every move I made. The melody grew clearer, guiding me like a beacon. It wasn't long before I realized where it was leading me. To the old, abandoned house at the edge of the village. Everyone knew about the house. It had stood there for as long as anyone could remember, a looming structure draped in shadows and mystery. Rumors about its past floated around the village like ghost stories whispered around a campfire. Some said it was cursed. Others claimed it was haunted by the spirits of its former occupants. But no one dared to go near it, and no one had seen any signs of life there for decades. As I approached, the house seemed to grow taller, its dark silhouette towering against the star-studded sky. The once grand mansion now looked like a relic of the past, its walls cracked and weathered, its windows dark and hollow like empty eyes. The iron gate at the front was covered in rust, its hinges creaking as I pushed it open. The sound echoed in the stillness, sending a wave of unease through me. The gravel path leading to the house was overgrown with weeds, the stones crunching under my feet. The melody was louder now, weaving its way through the night, beckoning me closer. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. The air grew colder, and a sense of dread settled over me like a heavy blanket. But I couldn't turn back, not now. Something about the melody pulled me forward, a magnetic force I couldn't resist. I reached the front door, its wooden frame worn and weathered by time. It was slightly open, as if waiting for me to step inside. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The stories about the house flashed through my mind, tales of ghostly apparitions and strange occurrences. My gut told me to turn around, to leave before it was too late. But the melody wouldn't let me go. It was calling me, urging me to enter. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and decay, a musty aroma that clung to my senses. Moonlight filtered through the broken windows, casting long, twisted shadows on the floor. The house felt alive, every creak of the floorboards echoing through the silent halls. The main foyer was vast, its tall ceilings disappearing into the darkness above. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, peeling away like forgotten memories. A grand staircase spiraled upward, its steps worn and covered in dust. But I wasn't interested in the details. My focus was on the melody, now louder and more distinct, guiding me deeper into the house. I followed the sound down a narrow hallway, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight. The walls were adorned with old portraits, their subjects staring down at me with hollow eyes. I avoided their gaze, my focus solely on the source of the sound. The melody was mesmerizing, a haunting tune that seemed to echo the house's own sadness. The hallway opened into a grand hall, and there it was, the source of the melody. A grand piano stood in the center of the room, its lid propped open, the keys moving on their own. The sight sent a wave of fear through me, but I couldn't look away. The piano played a broken tune, each note echoing in the vast, empty space. I stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat. The piano looked ancient, its wood cracked and varnish peeling. The keys moved as if pressed by invisible hands, the melody soft and sorrowful. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched the cold surface of the piano. It felt lifeless, yet the keys continued to move, producing the haunting melody. The room seemed to close in around me, the shadows growing longer, the air colder. I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on me, the melody wrapping around me like a shroud. I stood there, mesmerized, as the piano played on, each note a whisper of a forgotten past. As the melody faded, the keys stilled, and silence returned to the hall. I stood there, my heart pounding, my mind racing with questions. What had I just witnessed? Was it real, or had my imagination played tricks on me? The house was silent now, but the melody lingered in my mind, a haunting tune that would not be forgotten. I turned and left the house, the cold night air a welcome relief against my flushed skin. As I walked back home, the melody echoed in my mind, a mysterious tune that would haunt my dreams. I knew this was just the beginning. The house had revealed its secret to me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I would be drawn back to it, again and again, until I uncovered the truth behind the haunting melody. The walk home was a blur, my mind swirling with questions and the eerie melody still echoing in my head. The cold night air did little to calm my racing thoughts. The old house, the self-playing piano, the haunting tune, it all seemed like a strange dream, yet the chill in my bones reminded me it was all too real. By the time I reached my front door, the first light of dawn was beginning to stretch across the sky. I slipped inside quietly, careful not to wake my parents. My heart was still pounding, the events of the night replaying in my mind. The house had always been a source of fear and fascination for the villagers, but now, it felt personal. The melody wasn't just a random tune. It felt like a message, a story waiting to be uncovered. Sleep was out of the question. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring out the window as the sun rose, casting golden hues over the village. The peaceful scene outside was a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. I needed answers. What was that house? Why did the melody seem so familiar? And who, or what, was playing that piano? The next few days passed in a haze. I couldn't focus on anything. Every quiet moment was filled with the haunting melody, a constant reminder of the mystery waiting to be solved. I found myself drawn to the old house, my footsteps unconsciously leading me towards it every time I left home. But I always stopped short of entering, fear and uncertainty holding me back. One evening, unable to bear the curiosity any longer, I decided to return. This time, I came prepared with a flashlight and a notebook, determined to document everything I found. The sun was setting as I approached the house, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. The village was quiet, the streets empty, as if the world was holding its breath. The house loomed before me, just as imposing as I remembered. The gate creaked as I pushed it open, and the gravel path crunched under my feet. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. My heart raced as I reached the front door, its weathered surface bearing the scars of time. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed it open and stepped inside. The house was just as I had left it, silent and still, the air heavy with the scent of age and decay. The grand foyer stretched before me, the staircase spiraling into darkness. I followed the same path as before, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch me as I passed, their hollow eyes filled with silent judgment. I reached the grand hall, my flashlight casting a dim glow over the room. The piano stood in the center, just as I had left it. It was silent now, its keys still and lifeless. I approached cautiously, the memory of the self-playing keys fresh in my mind. The air felt colder here, as if the room itself held its breath. I ran my fingers over the piano's surface, the wood cold and rough beneath my touch. The keys were dusty, their surfaces worn from years of neglect. I pressed one gently, and a soft, discordant note filled the room, echoing in the stillness. There was no sign of movement, no ghostly hands playing the haunting melody. It was just an old, forgotten piano. Frustration bubbled up inside me. Had I imagined it all? Was the melody just a figment of my imagination, a trick played by my overactive mind? I sat down on the bench, the wood creaking beneath my weight, and let out a sigh. The house was silent, the only sound the faint creaking of the old structure settling into the night. As I sat there, my eyes were drawn to a small, dusty journal lying on the piano. I hadn't noticed it before. The leather cover was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age. I picked it up, my fingers trembling with anticipation. The journal felt heavy in my hands, as if it held the weight of untold stories. I opened it carefully, the pages brittle and fragile. The handwriting inside was elegant, each letter meticulously formed. The entries were dated, the first one from over a century ago. My heart raced as I read the words, the story unfolding before me like a forgotten memory brought to life. The journal belonged to a woman named Eleanor, a pianist who had once lived in the house. Her words painted a picture of a life filled with music, love, and heartbreak. She wrote about her passion for the piano, her struggles as a musician, and her deep connection to the house. But as I read on, the tone of her entries grew darker, filled with sadness and despair. Eleanor spoke of a tragic love affair, a romance that had ended in betrayal and loss. Her music, once a source of joy, became an outlet for her pain. She poured her heart into her melodies, each note a reflection of her sorrow. The haunting tune I had heard was her creation, a requiem for a lost love. The final entries were the most chilling. Eleanor wrote about strange occurrences in the house, unexplained sounds, shadows moving in the corners of her vision, and the feeling of being watched. Her writing grew more frantic, her words filled with fear and confusion. She believed the house was alive, its walls echoing her pain, and her music had awakened something within it. The last entry ended abruptly, the words trailing off into silence. I sat there, the journal clutched in my hands, the weight of Eleanor's story pressing down on me. The melody, the self-playing piano, the strange feeling that had drawn me to the house. It all made sense now. Eleanor's spirit lingered here, her music a haunting echo of her past. I closed the journal and placed it back on the piano. The air around me felt heavy, as if the house itself was mourning with me. I could feel Eleanor's presence, her sorrow filling the room. Her story wasn't just a tale of love and loss. It was a warning, a reminder of the power of music and the echoes of the past. I left the house that night with a newfound understanding, the melody no longer a mystery but a piece of Eleanor's soul, forever etched into the walls of the old house. As I walked home, the night felt different. The air was still, the stars shining brightly overhead. The house had shared its secret with me, and I knew I would return. There were more stories to uncover, more echoes of the past waiting to be heard. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sensation of unseen eyes following my every move. The melody played on in my mind, a constant reminder of Eleanor and her tragic tale. The house had become a part of me, its haunting tune a soundtrack to my thoughts. I knew my journey with the old house was far from over. There were still questions to be answered, mysteries to be unraveled. The house had many secrets, and I was determined to uncover them all. Eleanor's story was just the beginning, a doorway to a world of forgotten memories and haunting melodies. The past was alive in that house, and I was ready to face whatever it had to reveal. The days following my discovery of Eleanor's journal were a blur of restless nights and relentless thoughts. Her haunting melody was now an inseparable part of my life, its notes weaving through my dreams and waking moments. The house had become more than just a curiosity. It was a calling, an enigma that demanded resolution. I couldn't resist the pull any longer. I needed to return, to find the answers that Eleanor's journal had hinted at but never fully revealed. There were too many loose threads, too many mysteries left unsolved. What had happened to Eleanor in her final days? What had she meant by the house being alive? And most importantly, what was the source of the eerie melody that seemed to resonate with my very soul? I set out on a cold, misty evening, the village shrouded in a veil of quiet anticipation. The old house stood at the edge of the woods, its silhouette barely visible through the thick fog. The air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and decaying leaves, the perfect backdrop for the unfolding of the house's final secrets. Pushing open the gate, I felt a sense of resolve wash over me. This time I was determined to see it through to the end. The gravel path crunched beneath my feet as I made my way to the front door, its familiar creak greeting me like an old friend. I stepped inside, the chill of the house wrapping around me like a cold embrace. The silence was palpable, broken only by the soft rustling of the wind through the broken windows. I made my way to the grand hall, the piano standing in its usual place, silent and still. The journal lay where I had left it, a tangible reminder of Eleanor's tragic tale. I placed my hand on the piano, its surface cold and unyielding, and closed my eyes. The melody began to play in my mind, each note clear and haunting. I could almost feel Eleanor's presence beside me, her fingers dancing across the keys. The air around me seemed to shift, the room growing colder, the shadows lengthening. I opened my eyes to find the hall bathed in an eerie glow, the piano keys moving on their own, the haunting melody filling the space. I took a deep breath and reached out, my fingers brushing against the moving keys. The music stopped abruptly, the silence almost deafening. The room grew darker, the shadows deepening, as if the house itself was reacting to my presence. I felt a chill run down my spine. but I stood my ground. "Eleanor," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'm here to help. I want to understand your story." The room remained silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Then, slowly, the temperature began to rise, the chill dissipating. The piano keys moved again, this time in a slow, deliberate manner. The melody was different now, softer, more mournful. It was as if Eleanor was responding, her music a language of its own. I sat down on the bench, my hands trembling as I placed them on the keys. I began to play, the notes coming to me instinctively, guided by an unseen force. The melody grew richer, more complex, weaving a tapestry of emotion that seemed to fill the room. I felt a connection, a bond with Eleanor that transcended time and space. As the final notes faded into silence, the air around me seemed to shimmer, the shadows retreating. A soft, ethereal light filled the room, and I turned to see a figure standing by the window. She was barely visible, a translucent silhouette bathed in the soft glow. It was Eleanor, her presence both comforting and haunting. Her eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. She moved towards me, her footsteps silent, and placed a hand on the piano. The room grew warmer, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. She began to speak, her voice soft and melodic, like a whisper carried on the wind. "Thank you," she said, her words filled with emotion. "You've given me the courage to face my past, to confront the pain that has bound me to this house for so long." I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight with emotion. Eleanor's story unfolded before me, her words painting a vivid picture of her life, her love, and her loss. She spoke of a man she had loved deeply, a fellow musician who had betrayed her trust. Their love had ended in tragedy, and her music had become an outlet for her grief. But there was more. Eleanor revealed that the house itself had a history, a legacy of sorrow that stretched back generations. It was a place where the pain of its inhabitants lingered, their spirits trapped by unresolved emotions. Her music had awakened the house's memories, bringing her own story to the forefront. "I've been trapped here, reliving my sorrow, unable to move on," she continued, her voice trembling. "But your presence, your music, has given me hope. You've shown me that I can let go, that I can find peace." Tears filled my eyes as I listened to her words, the weight of her sorrow pressing down on me. I reached out, my hand passing through hers, and felt a warmth spread through me. Eleanor smiled, her expression one of relief and acceptance. As she began to fade, her form growing fainter, she spoke one final time. "Thank you for giving me the strength to let go. The house will no longer be a prison for lost souls. It will be a place of peace, a reminder of the power of music and the resilience of the human spirit." With that, she disappeared, the light fading from the room. The house grew silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. I sat there for a long time, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. The haunting melody was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and closure. I left the house that night, the stars shining brightly overhead, the village bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. The air was crisp and clear, the scent of rain-soaked earth replaced by the fresh scent of renewal. The old house stood silent and still, its secrets finally laid to rest. In the days that followed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The melody no longer haunted my thoughts, replaced by a sense of fulfillment and purpose. Eleanor's story had reached its conclusion, her spirit finally free. The house, once a symbol of fear and sorrow, had become a place of healing and reflection. I continued to visit the house, now a sanctuary for my thoughts and dreams. The piano remained, its keys silent but full of potential. I often played, the melodies flowing from my fingers, a tribute to Eleanor and the stories that had shaped the house. The village, too, seemed to change. The old house was no longer a source of fear, but a symbol of resilience and hope. Its presence was a reminder of the power of music, the strength of the human spirit, and the importance of confronting the past to find peace. And so the story of the old house came to an end, its final notes echoing through the village, a melody of hope and redemption that would resonate for generations to come. My name is Everett. I grew up in a small town called Willow Creek in Maine. Nothing exciting ever really happened there, except for the time I worked the early shift at Duffy's Diner during my senior year of high school. It was a cozy little place, with red booths, checkered floors, and a jukebox that only played songs from the 70s. I used to get there at 5:30 in the morning to open up. The regulars would start coming in around 6 o'clock, old Mr. Thompson, who always ordered black coffee and toast, and Miss Ruth, who liked her pancakes extra crispy for some reason. But there was one morning I'll never forget. A Thursday. I remember because I had a big math test later that day and had stayed up all night trying to understand algebra. I was exhausted, barely keeping my eyes open as I flipped the sign to open and unlock the door. A little after 6:30, the bell above the door jingled, and in walked someone I'd never seen before. He was tall and thin, probably in his late 40s. He had long, curly black hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in a while. His eyes were dark and sunken, like he hadn't slept in days. He wore an old leather jacket with patches on the sleeves and ripped jeans that were frayed at the bottom. His boots clunked heavily on the floor as he walked toward the counter. "Morning," I said, trying to sound cheerful, even though something about him made my stomach twist. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring at me with this strange half-smile. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low and gravelly, like he'd swallowed a handful of rocks. "Coffee," he said. "Sure thing," I replied, grabbing a mug from the shelf. "You want cream or sugar?" "No," he said, still staring. I poured the coffee and slid it across the counter. He wrapped his long fingers around the mug but didn't drink, just kept looking at me. "What's your name, kid?" he asked. "Everett," I said, feeling uneasy. "That's a good name," he said slowly. "Strong name." "Thanks," I mumbled, suddenly very interested in wiping down the counter. The diner was empty, which made the silence even more uncomfortable. I tried to busy myself, but I could feel his eyes on me the whole time. "You ever hear of a man named Elias Crowley?" he asked out of nowhere. I shook my head. "Can't say I have." He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile, more like the kind you'd see on a shark before it bites. "Elias Crowley was my great-grandfather," he said. "He used to live around here, did some interesting things." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. "He liked to collect things," the man continued. "Unusual things. Said they gave him power." "Power?" I echoed, not really understanding what he meant. He nodded. "Power over people, over life and death." I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking, but he didn't laugh, just kept staring at me with those dark eyes. "You know, Everett," he said, leaning in closer. "Some people say you can still hear Elias Crowley's voice on nights when the wind is just right, whispering secrets to anyone who listens." The bell above the door jingled again, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was just Miss Ruth, coming in for her usual pancakes. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. The man finished his coffee and stood up. He pulled a crumpled dollar bill from his pocket and set it on the counter. "Thanks for the coffee," he said. "I'll be seeing you around, Everett." And with that, he walked out, the bell jingling behind him. Miss Ruth gave me a curious look. "Everything okay, dear?" Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. Just a strange morning. But it didn't feel like just a strange morning. It felt like the beginning of something dark. Something I wasn't sure I wanted to be part of. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. When I walked home after my shift, every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind carried a whisper. And that night, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I thought I heard a voice. Faint, but unmistakable. Everett. I sat up, heart pounding. But my room was empty. The only sound was the rustling of the trees outside. I told myself it was just my imagination. But deep down I knew Elias Crowley was watching, and he wasn't alone. Hi, I'm Tommy, and I probably made the worst decision of my life a few nights ago. I agreed to house sit for my Uncle Jared. Uncle Jared is the cool one in the family, the kind who brings candy to family reunions and lets you watch scary movies when your parents say no. He has this huge house on the edge of town. It's old and creaky, but still, it's a nice place. Uncle Jared and his wife, Aunt Grace, were going on a cruise. Just water the plants and bring in the mail, he said. Easy job. You'll get paid and you can stay in the guest room. Sounded good to me. I was saving up for a new bike, and it felt like easy money. So, Friday afternoon, I packed my backpack with a few snacks, my favorite books, and my lucky flashlight. I wasn't scared. I'd stayed there before. Nothing weird had ever happened. Well, except for that one time their dog wouldn't go near the attic door, but that was probably because of a mouse or something. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I watered Aunt Grace's plants, she loves orchids, and watched some cartoons in the living room. I even found a box of Uncle Jared's old board games and played a few by myself. Everything seemed fine. Until Saturday night. It was around midnight when things got strange. I was lying in bed reading a comic book when I heard footsteps. They weren't soft like a cat walking around. These were heavy thudding steps coming from above me. The attic. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe the house settling. You know, like old houses do. But the footsteps didn't stop. They kept pacing back and forth, slow and steady, as if someone, or something, was walking up there. My heart started to race. I tried to ignore it, but then something heavy fell over. It sounded like a box had tipped. The footsteps got louder, and they weren't random anymore. It felt like whoever, or whatever, was up there was looking for something. I grabbed my lucky flashlight and crept out of the guest room. I didn't want to wake up in the morning to find something had fallen through the ceiling. I walked down the hallway, listening carefully. The house felt colder than usual. Every step I took seemed too loud, echoing through the quiet halls. When I reached the attic door, I stopped. It was an old wooden door with a brass handle that gleamed faintly in the moonlight. I stared at it for a long time, debating whether I should open it. Then the footsteps stopped. Just like that. Silence. I took a deep breath and backed away. If something wanted to come out of the attic, it could. But I wasn't going up there. No way. I tried to go back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. What if there was someone up there? A thief? Maybe I should call Uncle Jared? Just as I reached for my phone, another noise started. This time it was coming from the garage. It sounded like someone was banging on the garage door with something heavy. Bam! 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 Each hit made the whole house tremble. I jumped out of bed, heart pounding. The garage was just down the hall, connected to the kitchen. I tiptoed my way there, clutching the flashlight like it was a sword. The banging continued, louder and angrier. When I reached the door to the garage, I froze. There was a small window on the door, covered by a thin curtain. As I watched, a shadow passed behind it. Something, or someone, was definitely out there. I did what any sane kid would do. I locked the door. Then I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The banging stopped, But the footsteps in the attic started again. This time they were faster, like someone running. I backed into a corner, clutching the knife and flashlight, trying to control my breathing. The attic stairs were just down the hall, and I could hear them creaking as someone, or something, descended. I needed to get out. But when I ran to the front door, I realized I had locked it earlier, and now, in my panic, I couldn't get the deadbolt to turn. My fingers were too slippery with sweat. The footsteps were closer now, just around the corner. I didn't wait to see who or what was coming. With a final twist, I managed to unlock the door, yanked it open, and bolted into the night. I didn't stop running until I reached the street. My uncle's house loomed behind me, dark and silent. But as I glanced back, I saw something. In the attic window, a face was watching me. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its mouth twisted into a grin that made my stomach turn. It wasn't human. I jumped into my bike and pedaled as fast as I could. My heart didn't stop racing until I was miles away. The next day, Uncle Jared called. "Hey, Tommy, you okay? The security system went off last night. The motion sensors were going crazy." "Motion sensors?" I asked, confused. "You never told me about those." "They're new," he said. "We installed them after the last house sitter disappeared." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What happened to them?" "We don't know," Uncle Jared admitted. "The police never found any evidence. But the house, it's strange. Things move on their own. Sounds come from places they shouldn't." "I'm sorry, Tommy. I should have warned you." I didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say. I was just glad I had gotten out. But one thing's for sure. I'm never going back to that house. And if you ever get asked to house sit for someone with a big old house, maybe think twice. Because sometimes when a house creaks and groans, it's not just the wind. Sometimes it's something else. When I was a kid, around 10 years old, I used to spend a lot of time with my older cousin, Lance. Lance was 13, and he was the coolest person I knew. He had a knack for fixing things, telling funny jokes, and always seemed to know the most fascinating stuff. But what Lance loved most were spooky stories. He had a whole notebook filled with ghost tales and strange things he swore were true. One summer, we stayed at our grandparents' old house, deep in the woods. And that's where something happened that I'll never forget. My younger sister, Tessa, was with us too. She was 8 with bright red hair and freckles that made her look like a cartoon character. She was the type to tag along no matter what, always wanting to prove she wasn't scared of anything. I was somewhere between curious and cautious about all the creepy tales Lance told. But Tessa acted like she was totally fearless. The house itself was ancient. It creaked and groaned like it had a life of its own. The floors were uneven, the wallpaper was peeling, and the smell of old books and mothballs filled the air. Grandpa always joked that it was the smell of history, but Lance said it was the smell of ghosts. One night after dinner, we were sitting around in the living room. The lights flickered now and then because the wiring in the house was as old as Grandpa. Lance decided it was the perfect time to tell a new story. This one, he said, wasn't in his notebook. He claimed he had heard it from a friend of a friend, and it was absolutely true. "Have you guys ever heard about the Shadow Man?" he began, lowering his voice. Tessa and I leaned in closer. The wind outside rattled the windows, making it feel like the world itself wanted to listen. "The Shadow Man doesn't live in any one place," Lance explained. "He travels. He follows the scent of people who are curious about him. You can call him by accident just by thinking about him too much or talking about him at night." Tessa rolled her eyes. "That's just a dumb story to scare little kids," she said. But I could tell she was paying attention. "Oh, it's real," Lance insisted. "The Shadow Man doesn't walk like you or me. He slides, like smoke in the shape of a person. You don't hear his footsteps. You just see him in the corner of your eye, but when you turn your head, he's not there." What does he do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lance's face got serious. He doesn't hurt you, not exactly, but he likes to mess with you. He'll knock things over, open doors when you're not looking, and hide your stuff. At first you think it's just you being forgetful, but then you'll notice he's always there, watching from the shadows. And the more you notice him, the stronger he gets. I felt a chill run down my spine. Lance always had a way of making his stories feel real, but this time it was different. Even Tessa looked uneasy, though she tried to hide it. Okay, I said, trying to laugh it off. That's enough. Let's talk about something else. You scared, Finn? Lance teased. No, I lied. I just don't want Tessa to have nightmares. Tessa stuck her tongue out at me. I'm not scared, she said, but her voice wavered just a little. That night as we got ready for bed, Lance couldn't resist one last warning. Remember, he said, grinning, if you see something move in the shadows tonight, don't look directly at it. The Shadow Man hates being seen. I tried to laugh it off again, but as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about what Lance had said. Every creak and rustle in the house felt louder, more deliberate. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, listening to Tessa's soft snores in the bed across from mine. Lance was in the room down the hall. I told myself it was just a story, but my heart wouldn't stop racing. Around midnight, I woke up to a soft noise. It was faint, like something being dragged across the floor. I froze, straining to hear more. The sound stopped, and for a moment, all I could hear was my own heartbeat. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something shift in the dark corner of the room. My breath caught in my throat. It was just a trick of the light, I told myself. Maybe the curtains moving or a shadow from the trees outside. But then it happened again. A slow, deliberate movement, like something was sliding closer. I squeezed my eyes shut. Lance had said not to look directly at it. It's not real, I whispered to myself. It's not real. But then Tessa whispered, Finn, did you see that? I opened my eyes and turned to her. She was sitting up in bed, clutching her blanket. Her wide eyes were fixed on the same corner where I'd seen the movement. Go back to sleep, I whispered. It's nothing. It's not nothing, she insisted. It's him. I wanted to tell her to stop, to not even say the words, but before I could, the door to our room creaked open. Both of us froze. The hallway was pitch dark, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Then we heard it, the soft sound of something sliding across the floorboards again. Lance? I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. Tessa grabbed my arm. What do we do? She whispered. I didn't know. My mind raced, and I thought about Lance's story. Don't look at it, I said. Close your eyes. Just close your eyes. We sat there, huddled together, eyes squeezed shut, listening to the sound growing closer and closer. It stopped just in front of us, and for what felt like an eternity, there was nothing but silence. Then a low, raspy whisper broke the stillness. Why are you hiding? I couldn't take it anymore. I opened my eyes, and for a split second I saw him. A tall, thin figure made of shifting shadows, its face a blank void. As soon as I looked, it vanished, and the room went still. When morning came, Lance found us sitting together on the floor, clutching each other like we'd never let go. We told him what happened, and for once, he didn't tease us. He just nodded and said, I told you not to look. We never saw the Shadow Man again, but to this day, I'll never forget that night. And every now and then, when I'm alone in the dark, I'll catch a glimpse of something moving just out of sight. I don't look. I've learned my lesson, and I hope you do too.